Hi and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to continue building this R53 turbocharged engine. Today will be the last day that the engine is recorded in here, as most of the other steps now will be needed to be done inside the car. A lot of the top end turbo manifolds and inlet manifolds that I'll be putting on the video today I may only do with 1 or 2 bolts, and the reason for that is there is a plan to undo it so it's easier to attach the crane and move it without damaging parts. Let's continue with this build, starting with the sump and the strainer. One of the main things when building an R53 turbocharged engine is you need to have an oil feed and an oil drain. Now obviously these cars came either naturally aspirated or supercharged. They don't have an oil feed or an oil drain. So my drain I've took to the front of the sump, and this is just behind where the air conditioner pump would normally sit. I don't have an air conditioning pump on here, otherwise that would be a bit too close to the pipe work. A lot of the people who build these engines, they take it to this point on the sump. The issue I don't like about taking it to this part of the sump is it means that your power steering fan no longer fits, so your power steering has no longer got cooling. Now that was fine on the R50, but on the R53 they decided to put cooling fans on. I've decided with all the heat that's under there, I'm going to leave that in place, and my chosen point is the front. All you do to do this is essentially, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either weld on a weld-on fitting. Now I've gone with, I think that's a -12. But it doesn't matter. Find the right size for your turbo, what your turbo manufacturer requires you to do for a drain. And you can buy these weld-on fittings, they're a few pounds each. And then you can either weld them on and then drill through afterwards, or drill the hole and weld these on. One of the things you do need to be able to do, or at least know somebody, is have the ability for some aluminium welding. I obviously weld myself, so this is less of an issue for me. I can just do all this work. Inside my sump, I've decided that I'm not going to run baffles. I will come back and put them. I've got them there, but for the time being I've decided that now I'm going to run without them. This is my modified sump strainer. Now the difference between this and any other strainer used on an R53 is in the middle here I have a large magnetic filter. Now as you can see on the photos here, this is the ferrous metal that was captured within the core of this filter with a dimple on. So even though you're running a dimple, this is all of the debris that would have passed. Now inside here the filter is basically, it's like a throwing star with magnets in, and what it does is it captures the ferrous metal particles and it pulls them in to keep them out of the flow path. One of the things that I've always hated about a dimple, and this is why I feel this is the best place to have a filter, is the dimple magnetic filters that you put in your sump strainer are partly based on luck, so the ferrous particles have to go close enough to the magnet for it to capture them. The next problem is you get wash off, so if you don't take that magnet out and clean it regularly enough, what happens is the ferrous particles build up on that magnet, and then as your oil's flowing past it you can get wash off, sorry. And what happens with that is you then end up with a clump of ferrous metal particles that will go round your system. This one here captures the ferrous particles and removes them out of the flow path. So for me, I know that yes, I've got a dimple, that's great. Whatever passes by that dimple I can catch, I can take out. This is obviously a little bit more because I have to drop the sump off to get to this, but this is more of a once every 5 years or once every year if you've got the time and you want to take it apart. So this filter in here is Magnum filter. It's something I've looked at for a little while about making a specialist inline sump strainer, so you can just put one of these in and run it, and then every 5 years drop it out and see how you're getting on. This here catches, give or take, 100% of the ferrous particles that pass through. So let's get this little fella bolted in. Need to make sure that you've got your pink seal there, and then there's just 2 fixings that happen on here. So they go in, and we'll take these 2 fixings and get them started. Then all you have to do is bolt this in. They start. There we go. Come on. Okay, just get this one bolted down. Once that's in, we can get the sump strainer on. Now that the sump strainer's in, next part I want to do is just get the sump on. I know that's in there nice and solid. I don't know the torque figures for these bolts, but I generally just do them up tight and they don't go anywhere. So take your sump. Obviously what you're going to do is new gasket. So gasket's shaped You want these bits here to be facing upwards. Just take that and lay them on. Make sure all the tabs are over the edge because you don't want to crush everything. Make sure it's sitting flat. Obviously, without saying, you need to make sure all the surfaces are nice and clean. And take your sump and place them over. Now you may have an array of fixings. I'm using M8 stainless fixings. The reason for that is the original factory fixings are long gone. But I've used these for quite a few years, and it's something, at least if I lose one whilst I take the engine apart, I've got on the shelf. Let's get this bolted down. What you will notice is I'm going to leave out these two longer bolts at the moment. I do have them. They're just I just want to leave them out because I do plan to drop this sump off at some other point. Next thing we want to do, now we've got all the bolts just in loose, is just go around and torque them. We're going to go up to 31 Newton meters here, and I'll just work around in a ring. Okay, so that is now the sump fitted. If I was to turn this round with the sump fitted, as you can see, there's my oil drain from my turbo. So the pipe work from that is going to come from the side of the turbo down past the coolant pump, and it's going to go on there. And I'll be using essentially braided line for doing that. So we'll have one end fitted down here and the other end going to the turbo. It's probably that way around, looking at the shape on the pipe. So we'll get him chucked in a little bit. Right, the thing I want to do now, flip the engine over and have a look at the oil feed. Okay, with the engine back up, here from the original video, this is where I've decided to take my turbo oil feed from. It's the best place to take it because this is just after the oil's been through the filter, so after it's come in to the filter from the pump, gone off to the oil cooler, come back again, gone through the filter, this is the part then where the oil goes back into the galleries to feed all of the oil lines. So that is where I've decided to take the oil feed from. What you'll find is there's already a little BOSCH here, and with a little bit of modification you can get this dash fitting in here. Now I'm going to be using a dash 4 to the turbo for an oil line, and all we're going to be doing there is have this component, which some people choose to fit at the top, some people choose to fit in line. This is my 30 micron oil filter, so that one is going to get screwed onto there. Now what you notice is I've got PTFE on here. You don't need PTFE, it's just a bit of an old habit. So I'm going to do all of this hand tight because as I go to put this in the car, most of this I will remove and I don't want to damage. So that means the PTFE is also going to be damaged at this point, but I'll just wrap another line around it. Next thing you want to get is you want to get yourself an oil feed. Now I've had this specially made up at the length that I want, and essentially that will run from there up and over and into the turbo. So let's screw him in place. And that then completes the oil feed. That is what I want to do. Now obviously, as I've said, I will be dropping that off. One of the other things that I'm doing differently down here, and I don't expect you to have to do this or even want to do this, but back here is where your oil sensor is typically located. Your oil sensor is this component. You can see it if you look down the back of your engine. This is just a pressure switch, so if your pressure goes below, I think it's something silly like 5 bar, it might not even be 5 bar, it might be 5 psi, whatever it is. It's a silly pressure, and all that happens is when your oil pressure disappears, there's no pressure on this switch, so it puts a light on your dashboard to say, hey, you've got no oil pressure. that's fine as a, oh gosh, let's see what's going on type sensor. But what I wanted was a proper linear pressure switch so I could see exactly the pressure on my oil. So first thing I've got to do is get myself an adapter. Again, that's got some PTFE lining on, and again, I'm only going to do this hand tight at the moment. I will come back and tighten this up at a later date, but it won't be coming back out. Get the right size on. This fitting that I'm putting in here is a tapered fitting. The hole is straight cut, but we're just going to go up until it starts to bind. And at that point, the threads actually lock, and that's what causes them to seal. Hence why you don't really need any PTFE. But I like the PTFE because I know that if there's any tiny little gaps, it's going to make them up for me. So this is, there's no torque specs here. If I said what I was putting on, I'm probably putting about 25 Newton meters at the feel of this. And I'm just easing it because the last thing I want it to do is snap on me. So once I'm happy that I've driven that in and it's nice and tight, there we go. What I've got here is a BOSCH sensor. Now the nice thing about that is it's obviously a pressure sensor, but the other part about this sensor that I really liked is it's actually got a temperature stat inside it. So not only will I get oil pressure from the point just after it's been filtered and just after it's been through my oil cooler and just before my turbo, I've got temperature, oil, and that's really good. Obviously I'm going to have to rewire this, and I'll be taking it back to my FIPEC or G4 Plus, whichever way you want to call it, ECU. My ECU will manage that. It will send the data to my digital dash, and then I can choose what I want to do with that data. So we get him started, and that just drives up nice and hard. Now I'm going to be naughty, and I'm going to use just an adjustable spanner just to tweak him on. Now you have to get an adapter to do this, and obviously if you just put this sensor in your car as is, it's not going to do anything for you because your ECU won't know how to handle that data. In the R53, that connection from the back of this oil sensor actually just goes straight to your dashboard. It doesn't go into any ECUs, it doesn't go anywhere else. Just comes out, goes through your little round twist connector that would sit here on the arm by your gearbox, and then it just goes straight back to your dashboard. So all there is there's a feed to it, a return. You get low pressure, you get a light, that's it. The engine doesn't know anything different, and neither does the ECU. So that is my oil pressure, oil temperature adapter. That is my oil takeoff for my turbo. With the oil line in place, coming around, next thing I want to think about is the coolant lines. There's lots of different ways to do this. I've seen it done lots of different ways. Previously, on the hoses that came off the back of the engine, I decided to put lots of T-in pieces and take the coolant off that way. This time around, I've had a bit more time to think about it, and I've decided I'm going to do something different that keeps my coolant lines as short as possible. So, this pipe here, this is a standard R50 Cooper coolant return line. So you can buy these straight off BMW if you like, and they're nice. They've got a little bleed at the front, they've got the same pipe work that you would normally have on the back of your Cooper S at the back. Benefit is this pipe continues down to the water pump at the front. That's great, that's what I want really, because I'm using the Cooper pump. Why would we not want to change that? But the difference with this is, on the side, just here, I've decided to take this location and weld on a -6 fitting. So I've bought a stainless steel -6 fitting and welded it onto this pipe, made sure there's a hole through it, made sure it's all clean so coolant can flow. Now the nice thing about that is I can keep all of this really, really close, really smart. So it goes down there, push the hose onto the water pump, and then he will just sit there. So that is a nice OEM fitting. We've got the -6 just coming off the side. Now I understand it's difficult at the moment on the camera. I will be turning the engine round in a few minutes after we've gone over the next part I've done. So previously, as I say, I've used tee-off pieces. I was going to use this part again, and this is essentially a 1919 and a -6 takeoff. So you can fit your coolant return line or feed line down there. You can take your -6 fittings, put them on there and connect to the turbo. The thing I've always disliked about these is you've got a hose fitting there, that's a leak point. These can unscrew. Obviously I could weld it shut, but I'm not going to. That's a leak point. You've got the same on the other side. You've got this -6 fitting that can potentially leak. You've got the threaded fitting for the pipe that goes on the other side that can leak. And just in this one component, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 potential leak points just in this one component. So, previously videoed, I fitted the standard Cooper S thermostat housing plastic unit and fits on the side of the engine. Great. Having sat around and thought about things, I've decided to do this slightly different. So went on the internet and bought myself a cast aluminium thermostat housing. Here it is. Now what you'll notice on this one looks quite similar. In fact, you could almost say that they took them and just moulded straight over. But the difference is I took an aluminium -6 fitting, shaped the back, cut that flat and essentially welded that onto the thermostat housing. Now the benefit from this is all of the time this is the area you would be taking the coolant feed to your turbo from anyway, just after it's gone through the engine. And what you'll find is this area here is absolutely brilliant if you've got a side mounted turbo for taking your coolant lines off. So cut that down, welded it on, nice and simple. Obviously again you need to be able to aluminium weld. Put the thermostat in. The nice thing is, same, you can either use a factory thermostat, and in this case I've used an M7 thermostat. With the gaskets they fit perfectly, so that is ready to go. I've painted it black, they do come in an aluminium, and if you were just running a Cooper S and decided this plastic housing, you've had enough of it, it's warped over time or it's leaking or cracked, you can buy these. They're about 12 to 15 quid each. Obviously that's over in America, you need to ship them here, but I believe Orange have decided to start stocking these at some point. Same as the standard housing. You take your 3 bolts and you fit it together and torque it up to, I believe, 20 Newton meters. Obviously with figures like this that I'm quoting, just go and double check them. I will. With my 2-6 fittings, my thermostat housing fitting and my other one down there, what I'm going to do now is just take these hoses that I've purchased. These are just quick dash fittings. You can buy the stainless steel braid pipe or you can buy the nylon braid. I'd go with the stainless steel one here next to your turbo, and then it's just a case of fixing these up to the thermostat housing. Now on here I've decided that even though it's an extra leak path, I will be fitting a banjo fitting on the top of this pipe. It just makes fitting this up all a little bit easier. So, taking this one, I know that in this case I'm going to be using this particular pipe here for my feed to my turbo. Now this is completely up to you. You can choose whichever one of these to use depending on your turbo manufacturer. Mine can flow either way around, so I know that's going to be the out and that's going to be the return. So we'll take my 2 fittings and get them in place. That one will do. At this moment in time this pipe's just loose, and that's partly because as I come to put the gearbox on I prefer to have this loose, and I'll tighten it up after. So those 2 in. Now what you want to do is tighten them, but again these will be coming off because I've got to have all this room free so I can get a crane on and lift it off. Coolant lines, have I got that right? I have. So you take your banjo bolt. Again, you'll notice there's no copper washers going on here, or whatever you want to call them, the sealing washers, and that is because I'm just going to do these hand tight and remove them. So my feed for my turbo goes on this side. Let's get him started. Okay. There we go, straight out of the cylinder head, round and up and into the turbo. I now want to do the return, so this is slightly more awkward, it needs to come this side, and I'll put a photo up so you can see what I'm doing here. And again, I'm just going to do this one finger tight. When I come to do this on the car, what I tend to do is tighten up the banjos first. and then put the turbo onto the manifold. It's nice because you actually have the gearbox sitting here, so you've got a little bit of support, whereas in the workshop, if I let it go, it's going to hit the floor. So there's 2 pipes and there's clearance between the 2 pipes. Next thing I want to do is turn this round and get the oil dump pipe on. Let's put him where he goes. With the coolant lines in place and the oil feed in place, what I'm going to do is put the turbo manifold on. Now in this case, I'm only going to put it on with a couple of bolts. The reason for that is there's a good potential it's going to come off. I've got a used gasket, so I'm going to put it on as part of the demo to show how all of this would go together. And I will be reusing fixings. When you come to put your gasket on, you'll notice one side of it's raised and the other side of it is flat. I always go with the raised side going towards the inlet at the head, and at least then any other flow that comes past can hit that and compress out. But I guess there's if you buy a BMW one, which this is not, it does say top and it does say which way's outside. Okay, just round this side of the engine. This is the exhaust side. This is difficult when you're not in the car, and it's extremely difficult to put on when the engine's actually inside the car. So, if you could stand here when you put this inside the car, this would be fantastic. This would make life a lot easier. I'll only be doing this up as well touch tight. Just enough so it can hold everything to show everybody what's going on with it. Yeah, there it is. I hope all of this is clear, and I'll add photos as well, along with all this everywhere I think it's necessary in the video. Okay, and we'll just put one in the middle at the moment. There we go. It's easier with studs, but even when you have the studs, trying to get the nuts on the back of this, especially from the front, when you're working inside the car and looking over the firewalls here, and you can just about see this, and this fiberglass exhaust matting stuff is horrible. It gets into your skin. It's a little bit nicer once it's been used, but when it's brand new, the fibers, you want to be wearing gloves. This one's been on from the last time. It's not as bad, but it's still not that nice. So turbo, I've got my drain at the bottom, that's been adapted. The sides, I've got nothing, but what you'll see on this side is that's my Pandro fitting that's going on there, and that is at the top. That comes with the Owen developments. That is a -4 fitting that is already filtered. For my fitting, I've got V-band clamps. If you're going to do it, this does make life a lot easier, especially when you're trying to juggle it. So you can chuck that on, chuck him on. Now what you'll notice is the turbo can choose to sit wherever it likes at this moment in time. Just make sure the mating faces are in. When I come to do this in the car, what I tend to do is I tend to hide these fittings. I think it just looks a little bit better. I know that in this line here matches up with the casting, so I'll just rotate him around so he gets to the right place. Okay. Stay there for me, turbo. And because a lot of these fittings you'll find are imperial, you'll have to make sure you've got an imperial set of spanners to tighten everything up, which is why I'm using this particular set rather than a ratchet. When you buy V-bands, you're buying clamps, try and buy the best you can. But you'll find a lot of the time this V-band clamp's been on and off several times already. I have some spares which will be, when I actually put this together finally in the car, I'll change this out. Right, I just want it there. That allows me still, does it allow me to tweak it? No, it doesn't. I'll just back it off a bit. In the car this is a lot easier because I've actually got the dump pipe for the turbo. So aligning it up just makes it that little bit easier. Have I got, nope. When I'm tightening up that V-band, especially for this moment, I know where my line should be for the turbo, but I've just left enough slack in which just allows me to rotate this. So, taking my oil line, now you can flex these and bend them a bit if you need to. It's a PTFE lined hose. You want to make sure that it's not right up against this housing, so I tend to twist it slightly forward. Again, only finger tight because it will be coming back off. Back here, that essentially ends up living there by the time it's all clipped into place. Turbo's on, turbo feeds on, we've got coolant to both sides and they're connected up to the engine. As you can see, this is beautifully all nice and contained, there's no pipes running off everywhere else. That's the sort of system I wanted. So again, you can make these up yourself, you just buy the fittings and away you go. Onto the sump, it's slightly tight, so for me I have to go round the water pump and I bolt on down here to my sump. Again, this pipe will probably come off just to make my life a little bit easier when I come to install the engine. That side there. And then my next one is going onto the dash fitting up here. Oops. As you can see in the photo, this is nice and neat back here. Just giving it a wiggle to help because it's a little bit difficult. I really should use a spanner. But it's coming off, so hey, to hell with it. Let's leave that back there. So now what I've got is an oil feed that runs down there. What I tended to do is I've put a P-clip in there in the past and I just hold that up against the engine. But for now we'll just let him roam free. Once that's on, we know that coolant pipes have got to come off, but as you can see with my engine stand, it's so close to this coolant pipe I'd never get it off. But all I do here is use a Cooper, or you can use a Cooper S to be honest, a coolant hose that comes over to the top, and at the bottom that's definitely a Cooper one. Be careful when you're looking for radiators to put Cooper pump on. If you use an S, no worries. But if you decide I'm going to run a Cooper cooler as well, just be aware that there's two versions. One's a twin pass, so you've got your coolant and your fill on this side, and then the other version, which is the aircon version, has your top and bottom feed. Now that's the version I've gone for, but they do a little hose that sort of comes round and comes to the front. It's up to you which one you want to use, but coming round here gets a little bit in the way of my turbo cooling pipes, my intercooler pipe work, which essentially has a run from the top down round into my intercooler and then back up and into the plenum. Turbo's on, feeds on, and all the oil and coolant lines are in place. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the plenum on, and the reason of that is I'm just going to show you how all this front part goes together. Be aware I will be leaving the main gasket out, and that's just because I want to take all of this off, including this rocker cover and all the turbo, when I put this into the engine, just so I don't end up scratching anything. Obviously that's after putting all this effort into making everything look nice, last thing I want to do is destroy it putting it into the car. So my plenum manifold is a GRS unit. I don't believe he makes them. You'll have to give him a shout up and see if he'll make one set. And this allows me to either run a standard fuel rail or an aftermarket fuel rail. Okay, that'll do. That's really loose, but we'll go with it. Yep, nice and loose. Okay. Throttle body. In the past, I've used a BMW 340i version. That just plug and play. The 335i is the same as well. It's a VDO throttle that just bolts on. This time around, just using a standard Cooper S one. It gave me good numbers last time, and I can always change it later. It just mean cutting up this plenum and making a different different unit. So for the way a lot of us mount it, it's with the plug facing up. That all depends on how you're going to run your pipe work. That's totally up to you. They have their own little seals in, which is nice. Again, I'm only going to do this loose. I will put all four in, but they're coming back out. And I will do a video of all of this going into the car, and ultimately then I will show how it all fits and how everything goes nice and tight. And then how I run all the pipe work. And probably all the wiring, even though it's going to be slightly different on this version because I'm deciding to tuck everything. Okay, that's great. So the three less things that we want to be getting on here are some of the sensors, and those are cam sensor, hopefully not, go in there, crank sensor goes at the bottom, cam sensor goes at the top. They get some bolts to hold them in. All sensors and plugs like that, I always remove them before I move an engine, so I'm not even going to bother bolting these in because they're coming straight out. Reason for that is they're plastic, they're brittle, and I know how I am when I'm trying to move one of these things around, so I'll take them off. Another sensor, this is an UMNO. It's a 3-bar sensor. They're about £80, and the nice thing about this is it uses the standard mini fitting to go on the front. So if you've got a standard R53 manifold, you've decided to either make a fixing or weld something on so it can take a throttle here, these are great. They use the standard plug, they fit on the front, they'll pick up on your same fixings, and whilst your factory ECU won't know what to do with this, your aftermarket ECU, you can scale it. It's a 0 to 5 volt reading out, so you can tell your ECU when it's got 5 volts, then you're seeing 3 bar, and you've got the same for temperature there, so you can now measure your temperature at this position inside your plenum just before it's going into the engine. Obviously that's the best place to deal with it because that's what you want to be doing up here now. Is that going to stay in? He is. Okay. At the moment this is a standard Cooper S fuel rail. I may change this to a nuke. We'll see. This works fine. The fuel regulator with the pump and everything I've got has always been able to deliver enough fuel. So all we do, I've got the covers on, I'm not going to take them off at the moment. They push onto the top there, and then I can connect my fuel into this and connect all the electricity up for my my fuel rail, my injectors. So that there ultimately is the turbocharged engine. Now we've got this part here which goes from the intercooler up. You've got my dump valve, because you've got to have one that sits here. That lets everything off. And we've got the charge pipe which goes to the intercooler around a 90-degree unit, and that sits about there inside the engine. So as you can see at the bottom, the sump drain from the turbo is actually quite close to this, and you can see why I've had to remove the air conditioning as well. Not that I need air conditioning. If I want aircon, I'll take out a more modern everyday car. Okay. Right, one of the things I want to do now, just chuck this belt on. This is all I'm running is a standard alternator, standard water pump and a standard zero size pulley, even though it's an ATI. I'm running a 6PK 893 belt. And for this, there's several ways you can do it. And so you can see. You can get these tools or you can bend a screwdriver, it's up to you. And the idea behind that is it fits in there and goes into this hole, so as you lift this arm up you can at least pin it, which stops it snapping back on your hand. I have the correct tool, but in this instance, because I don't have anything on the side of the car, you can actually just stick a 1/4 inch drive into the side of this. You can lift up the arm and you can drop your locking tool in and go away. Nice and simple. Take your belt round the alternator, round the coolant pump, and let's go this way around. Go on. Maybe it's easier to go this way. Sit him on, and it is tight. It's not normally this tight there. Let me just see if I've got a bit more freedom. Okay. Okay, the lock tool's not helping me, I've got a bit more freedom. There we go. So that is the belt on. Nice short runs. Nice and simple. Then we've got a standard casting. Difference with this is I've actually removed the ground stud off the side when I had it powder coated. Reason for that is I take my ground feed somewhere else on the engine, and it was all part of trying to hide the cables. Okay, nice and loose again. I'll be using these fixing platforms, which is why they're only going on loose. Pipe work. This one here will return back and go for my fuel regulator, so there's a vacuum pipe that goes between those. This one here actually runs back to my brake booster, so that comes around there, and that's what I'm using for my vacuum for my brakes. And obviously there's a no return valve on the brake boost master cylinder, so you don't end up pressurising it, which would be silly because then you'd be fighting against it with your foot to pump the brakes. And that is now the turbocharged engine almost ready to go in. My last things that I'll be doing, and this will be right next to the car just before it goes in, is I'll be putting the crank seal on, I'll be putting the flywheel on, be putting the clutch on, and we'll be putting the gearbox on before it goes into the car. I will actually be putting driver side and passenger drive shafts on before it goes in. I prefer to feed the whole lot in as a single unit, and then we'll be wiring it up inside the car. That should hopefully be here in the next couple of weeks, that video. I'm running a little bit behind. The editing takes me forever and I only get a few hours in the evening. Other things and modifications that you need to consider when doing these engines. This is where your current coolant tank and your power steering tank are. What I've done is, because my manifold's nice and stumpy and short, took it to that side and I've essentially made up a tank that sits here. I've took a Canton tank and then I've welded on a power steering tank to the side. So that sits here. You then end up changing your pipe work to your power steering pump about down here, and that solves that issue of how do you do your power steering pump and all the feeds down there. Coolant pipes down the side. Once you've got all this in place, you could, if you wanted to, continue running them exactly as they are, especially if you do the modification the way I've done it, which is to put the -6 fittings onto the casting and the pipe work. I'm going to make up a set of pipes myself, which are aluminium from here all the way down, but that's just my own preference. You can do whatever you like with your coolant pipes, but that is how simple it is to build the R53 turbocharged engine. And price wise, well, it depends on how much you can do yourself, but that'll be coming in a later video on how much I've spent building the whole engine. I'm sure it's a figure I don't want to know. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this series, and you continue watching as we get this engine into the car and then get it fired, take it for its dyno and putting it on the road.